Hello,
Señor Meepagala.
Mrs. Meepagala. So what do you think of the new studio?
Awesome.
Cool. How you doing?
Yeah, pretty tired.
Uh-huh.
Our baby's keeping me up
Yeah.
a lot.
Word.
Yeah, like almost every hour.
Yeah.
But considering everything, I was reflecting this morning thinking like, I don't think our baby is necessarily, like he doesn't necessarily require less attention. I think I just got better at it, at functioning without sleep.
That's good.
Yeah, I do like sleep.
Yeah. Sleep is good. But here we are. So I was thinking we could talk about gender roles.
Okay, you
Yeah.
start.
Yeah, because we were speaking actually to a mutual friend of ours who he's in a committed relationship with his partner, and he doesn't have any political or even moral views on like how men or women should behave. But like for him, it's almost more practical because he makes a lot more than his partner, and his partner spends a lot of time working, but doesn't even come up with half of their expenses and costs. And I told him about our situation and how you were actually earning. Well, it's not the reason why we took on this more traditional approach. It was more that we decided to have children, and motherhood's a full-time job, and it should be. I think. I assume you think too. So I'd actually love because I talk about this stuff when I'm just talking to the camera, and I'll say, oh yeah, my wife agrees with me, but here you are, right? Because it is. I do think sometimes, at least to certain years, it's a bold thing for a man to say, oh, this is what's better for both men and women, these kinds of roles. Or at least that's what works for us. It's not even to say what's better or worse.
Yeah, I was actually contemplating this because, recently somehow this came up, no? Like the shock in my system of when I actually dropped my work to be pregnant and fully immerse myself in that experience. Like it really shook my system. And I think at the time I didn't realize how attached I was to the identity of being an intimacy life coach and how much I gained from that, respect and acknowledgement and confidence. And when that dropped away and I had to surrender for basically the first time in my life to someone paying for everything, it really took time to kind of integrate that. And if I'm honest, having gone through that experience, a part of me thinks that it is part of the reason why women would choose to continue working, because the confrontation of needing to confront the ego, I guess, and rely and therefore trust more in the man that they are with. On some level, on some subconscious level, like we're aware that that's going to cause a shock.
Yeah.
Because I do see women who continue working in a way that doesn't always make sense. Like sometimes it's not necessary. Sometimes I see the woman so much more stressed. Of course, there are families in which there is no choice, but for both people to work, and that's super unfortunate. Because, I feel that pregnancy in itself and birthing and being in these baby years, that's what I call them. I feel like there's so much transformation happening in me. If I were to continue holding on to the type of work that I was doing, in a way, I wouldn't allow the transformation to occur in the way that that is intended, the way I see it. No, because of course I am wanting to work again at some point. And I feel like I just need to relax into these parts of confusion and not always having life make sense or not being able to breathe or think or whatever. But somehow I feel like whatever is occurring inside, the transformation will lead me to somewhere where then work makes sense again. Anyway, I think I'm drifting off a little bit from your question.
Well, two things. It's like, so I've been witnessing your process and you shared verbally what's going on. And it's like, it's something we say a lot is like, how do other women be mothers and work corporate jobs? Like we kind of bring this up and it's kind of like, well, with what you just said, well, I guess they can't fully, and it's obviously not to shame anyone. And obviously many people, especially our friends in Western cities, the necessity is that you just need a 2-income household. That's just how it is. Like they don't, like you said, they don't have a choice, but it's like, oh, just if you look at hours in the day or number of calories of energy that a person has in a day, how could you possibly do the whole process that you've gone through? Like, it's not like you've had time to, in the way that you've been mothering, it's not like you've had time to have another part-time job, right? Like there's not like actually extra space. So it's like, well, are the people who are, because of necessity or choice, working 50 hours a week in an office and also being a mother, what's their experience like, but also are they just maxed out? Are they missing out on something?
Yeah, because other people end up raising your kids, no? And I feel like there's such an intricacy that happens in like the details, like the way that you and I discuss, you know, certain expressions of our kids or this and that and how to maneuver it. It's like we are laying the foundation. And yeah, if the choice is there, I do feel like, yeah, it's quite something, no?
Yeah. And then, well, the other thing that came to me when you were speaking is like, so I've also gone through kind of a process. It's different, obviously, for a man than a woman. But the way I framed it and the way I was just speaking to Chris, our friend, about something related to this is like, I feel like before fatherhood, I really invested in a certain persona or character or, you know, even value system that really worked for a single man. And then switching to father life, it was like I'm starting from the bottom. And it was like a big thing of like, okay, I spent my 20s trying to build up a certain kind of version, a bachelor version of myself. And now I'm cashing it all away and starting from zero. And that's all, I mean, I would imagine it's similar to what you're saying. It's like for a woman who's built her career up and then to give it up is very different than a woman who never had a career.
Yeah. Yeah, this is so true. Yeah, I did have that feeling. I mean, my experience, I think in general, was a bit extreme considering I was no longer in my own home. I was no longer surrounded by my friends and family. So like the fact that I dropped everything to be with you and create the family, which in a way I felt like, wow, I manifested everything beyond my dreams. And of course, I'm willing to give it all up to have it all. And yet the shock was so like, there was nothing for me to hold and grasp onto. But now that I'm kind of landed into whatever version of myself, I can look back and I'm like actually really grateful that it was such an intense experience because I would have needed to confront these aspects of self anyway. And I think that maybe this is part of what people go through in their midlife crisis or whatever.
You know, something I just realized is like, so I always try to bring things back to pre-civilization life of like,
Yeah.
how did our, and I was thinking, I mean, who knows what culture was like in like the Neolithic age, but if you look at many indigenous cultures, the norm is female exogamy. So the woman leaves her family or leaves her tribe to go to the man's tribe. That's
so
more
right.
common.
In
I was like,
India,
oh,
it's the same.
yours is kind, I mean, we didn't plan it this way or it wasn't like really intentional, but
Right.
you
My
left
father
your
married,
culture.
well, actually my father married me off to
Yeah, yeah. I bought you for a couple of cows. But yeah, I mean, you left your country to be in where I was living. It's not my country, but I was living in Thailand, and you came. Yeah, you had to assimilate into my friends. We didn't actually do that, and how we're back in your country, so we kind of did a little bit of both. But yeah, I mean, and I was thinking, you know, because actually one of our friends was saying here in Peru, she was interviewing some local women, I guess, for some documentary. I don't remember, like local Peruvian Andean women, and one woman was like kind of crying and lamenting about how, you know, she left her family and she was close to his family. She just married this, you know, and she moved in with her husband's family, and our friend who's Australian, you know, she had just left her family to like do this film in Peru, and she's like, they were connecting, and she's like, oh yeah, so how far away is your family? Can you see them? And then the Peruvian woman was like, over there. It was like a 20-minute walk away. But in her world, you know, her world is smaller. She's used to like seeing her mom and her parents and her brothers and sisters every morning and spending all day around them. And now she's spending all day around her husband, her in-laws. They're only 20 minutes away, but she doesn't, you know, it's like, you know, it's just funny.
Yeah.
You traveled literally to the other side of the world to be with me.
I would do it again.
Similar shock. Thanks. But I guess this is maybe, I don't know if this is like a ancient or what's the word, ancestral, or just like a thing that's woven into us where it's more normal or it's human tradition for the woman to leave her family.
The only thing that was different, I would say, than how these things go traditionally in certain cultures still today is that I wasn't like pulled into your family and supported by all those women.
Yeah, it was my digital nomad friends.
Very isolating. To go through such a remarkable, indescribable transformation, initiation, and not have people who really know me around me, because I do think, that there's something in the metamorphosis that happens. I mean, you know, science backs this up, no? Like the brain physically changes through pregnancy. and birth in itself is a whole other story. But it's like to lose yourself like that, like you have to lose yourself, you have to lose your mind. Some kind of support system is necessary. And it's interesting because I learned so much from that first time around, and we tried our hardest to like get everything set up. It's part of why we came, let's say, to my country. It's not my country, but yeah, it is my home, Peru. And I know so many people here. I have all the contacts, and we set up the space really well for after birth, for our second. And still it was like, wow, incredible to see that it just isn't enough support, I guess, unless you are with family.
Yeah. Because, I guess with, say, the local Andean women, when she gives birth, her mother-in-law and her mother's probably coming from over the hill. And like everyone
From
she
over the
knows.
hill,
Yeah,
yeah.
everyone she knows is there. Right. Or at least that's how it was traditionally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, there's something we've talked about, and I think I've also mentioned on the podcast, is, I mean, the idea, traditionally, and perhaps this is why the cultural thing is of the woman being exogamous, is that she's going from the care of her father to the care of her husband, right? And that's why we have the convention. Most cultures have the convention of the woman taking the man's name, because that's the clan that takes care of her if she's in trouble, kind of thing. And you've mentioned how, even though you've had many relationships, you haven't really been in that surrendered state since
Ever.
your father until me, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Somehow I had a pattern of being more financially abundant, and it wasn't like I was providing for their lives, but there would always be these weird situations where somehow I needed to end up paying for a flight or this or that. And upon contemplation, when I was doing all the inner work to get ready for you, I realized I just wasn't ready to let go of control, to be in that surrendered state. And I took on the role of my father in those relationships. And it somehow, I think, feels safer for a woman to be in her masculine. And I do wonder how many women are listening to this with this feminist imprint, which I think, honestly, all women have, including myself, even though I didn't want to admit it. Because, we are bombarded from the moment that we start growing. I mean, there might be some Disney movies that, portray the beauty of a surrendered woman. But other than that, everything you see on TV or hear, or even through music, especially through adolescence and all these formative years, it's like we get imprinted what a strong independent woman is, and how that is the version of the woman that receives, the recognition. And even today, when yesterday you were like, oh, what shall we talk about? There was a part of me like, motherhood? Oh, that's so boring. Like, who would want to listen to that if that were in your title, right? And the fact that I still have these lingering thoughts of like how boring it is to speak about motherhood. Like, I'm definitely not the type who goes on Spotify and looks for motherhood type of podcasts. But it's interesting because the topics that are discussed on these podcasts will only attract mothers. And lately I've been thinking a lot of, obviously because we have a girl, of like, who is teaching the girls, the adolescents, of the entire hormonal journey that a woman goes through? Like, if that were part of our understanding before, we have our first menstruation, before we get pregnant, before we need to go through this like ego death experience through birth, et cetera, or even just having the knowledge of what it means to have an empowered birth. It's like, if all of that, because like women would only dive into that the moment they conceive, or the moment they have issues conceiving. Like, oh, how does the cycle actually work? When do I actually ovulate? Like all of these basic things. And I feel like it should be part of our basic knowledge to understand like what we go through in pregnancy and so on.
I mean, specifically girls' knowledge. Like, this is
I
stuff
think
that,
so.
This is stuff that if we imagine indigenous cultures or pre-civilization cultures, this is what the grandmother taught the granddaughters.
Yeah.
And this was like the magic or the mystery of being a woman, which I mean, I say, ironically, feminism goes by a totally masculine value system where this stuff is totally discounted. And then it also makes sense, right? Like, the whole world since civilization began, it's from a male paradigm. It's based on a male value system. It's based on male incentives. So of course, anything that's not that paradigm is going to seem like worthless. And then, the way that, not to make a whole historical rant, but it's like, women's suffrage and obviously women's rights are important. And, we're great. But people were arguing this, conservatives were arguing this like in the early 1900s, is that when women start working or when women start doing the same things men do in society, one, economically, that means eventually costs rise. And now every home, every household needs two incomes in the West to survive. Like we have a luxury living in a third world country and being entrepreneurs. But then also women lose the mystery or the what's special about womanhood, which I can only say while talking to you because I don't know it myself, but it's like, yeah, of course I want our daughter to have full range where she can start a business and make money if she wants, but she can also appreciate the magic of her body.
Yeah. Yeah. So to kind of weave into that with what I was saying earlier, like that the thought is there of like, oh, boring. I remember one of the most confrontational things when I just became a mother was like, I could no longer answer the question, what do you do? And it caught my attention that is the thing that people want to know when they meet you. And somehow when that isn't there, like I kind of lost myself in like, who am I? No, but it had me also thinking like, I want to ask that question to my children, like, who do you want to become? As in like, what are, the core values that you want to integrate? How do you want to be in relation to, as opposed to, I want to become, a doctor, yeah, exactly. Or whatever, no? And I have clear memories of that when I was a child in primary school, because these are the questions that are being asked and this is how we project into the future. But in a way, yeah, it doesn't leave room for this aspect of motherhood. I do think that even though feminism obviously is getting in the way of having a beautiful polarizing relationship between a man and a woman in a heterosexual, partnership, I do think they have a point, because the nuclear family obviously was created in a way to disempower women, because it's very unnatural. Like you say, it has more to do with the gain economically, and it just isn't right. I mean, I have support. I feel like I have a lot of support considering how we've set up our lives. And to think that, for example, my mother did all of this alone, and even me, like I have moments where I'm just like, where's time for me? How can I think, like, how can I return to my body? That's what we were talking about yesterday. It's like, I get so ungrounded because I'm so busy, and yet I have so much help, and it just doesn't make sense. And so, of course, the feminist movement would want to, counteract that by going in the exact opposite direction, because in a way they did disappear into,
Yeah, this is, it's kind of ironic that nowadays the move towards nature, and I've been having this debate with Chris, actually, because obviously with the culture war, there's these competing value systems being thrown, and it affects relationships and family and how people should behave and whatnot. But the nuclear family is unnatural. And I was just saying to him that like my value system, anytime there's like a million different ways to view something, I try to at least ground myself, like what is actually most in line with nature. And sometimes that's more liberal, sometimes it's more conservative. But like I was saying how like the nuclear family is actually very unnatural, like you said. Like we should not be these isolated two adult homes, right? We should be more woven in with like our extended family. That's how we evolved, and that's why. I would imagine for the Neolithic tribe, motherhood was easier because you were with all of your girlfriends that you grew up with. You're all pregnant at the same time. Your mothers are there. The grandmothers are there. That's what we would imagine would be much easier. However, the move of like recently is not even like the nuclear family is actually a little bit more natural, because now it's like people are breaking up into isolated units. This is going to be a weird analogy and you might not care, but like in military history, Clausewitz, I've mentioned this to all the men listening, and he had the idea that like warfare shifts in state. Like back in the day, it was solid state, so it was like big blocks of men attacking each other. Then it became liquid state, where it was more about like maneuvers and like smaller units. I could see you're zoning out, but it was like smaller units, and it was more about how they moved. And nowadays it's more gaseous state, where like like the single soldier can do so many things. He could call in an airstrike, and it's almost like you see the same thing in domestic life. Of like, it used to be the huge tribe, and they needed a huge tribe to accomplish anything. Then it became the nuclear family, where they are the economic unit. It's like them against the world. And now it's like individuals, where like even in a family, sometimes we know a lot of couples where like they have separate bank accounts and they make their own money, and then it's like they're really economically totally separate entities, and then maybe they share, or they have to transact with each other in the same home, which seems ridiculous. And like in that case, it's better to move to the nuclear family situation. But even that's not natural. Like we're so many degrees away.
Yeah, but that's the lack of trust in the man.
Mm-hmm.
And I think feminists would then argue, yeah, but if I were to surrender completely, my independence onto my man and needed his financial support for everything, then the moment if he were to drop me, I have nothing.
Yeah, game theoretically, I understand why the feminist prescription exists.
Yeah, me
because
too.
it makes you so vulnerable. Like you really need to
and yet
trust.
It's in that vulnerability where the woman finds her power. And it's, sometimes really interesting for me to see like how we got it all wrong. Because our last birth was a free birth, and it was, to me, the most empowering experience of my life. It was like something just clicked in my being of having basically birthed by myself, like being untouched. No one spoke to me, no one touched me. And I was just guided by my body, my intuition, listening to what I needed. And in 2.5 hours, our baby was born. And it was like, wow. And my entire pregnancy guided me to that moment. It wasn't like we intended at the start of the pregnancy that it was going to go that way. But I listened. And it got me thinking that, the most dangerous thing is not to try and prevent all these risks that can happen, but rather to cut the woman off from her inner voice. Like that's the absolute most dangerous thing. I would say that is what brings risks in pregnancy and in birth, because the external thinks that they have the answer for an individual who's going through a very unique experience that cannot often be compared to other pregnant women or birthing women or statistics or whatever. I mean, our baby wasn't even in the right position. So the statistics don't, anyway. But what I was trying to say is like that form of surrender and the power that is ignited in the symbolism, let's say, of what birth represents, that is the feminine. And so when I see women, whether they're mothers or not, needing to prove or needing so much of that recognition, kind of screaming for it, obviously not literally, but I find it so unattractive. And I actually have a few sisters who are like that. And it's starting to help me see the parts of me from my past that were just well constructed. And they gave the illusion that I was a very confident woman when I was hiding behind something that just didn't allow me to touch that vulnerable aspect within myself that actually is my power. And so sometimes when I see women desperately trying to hold on to that aspect of self, or how they win, the recognition and the respect, it's interesting because it's often those women who can't have a relationship last, or it's the woman who simply won't allow for her man to truly be in his masculine. And they take the lead, they wear the pants, right? Whether they're mothers or not. And I'm starting to see like how unattractive that is. And it's kind of interesting to see that as a woman, no? Because before I birthed our babies, I guess in a subliminal way, I was competing with my sisters, and I wasn't even aware of that because I knew I had high status. So it was either I met my peers or people, like, I don't know. And it's this ego thing, this masculine thing within women that is the ickiest and the stickiest when it comes to sisterhood, because it prevents us from even surrendering deeper to each other. And I think at the base of intimacy is how we are with other women as women.
Yeah, because I think what I was trying to get at before with like women entering the workforce is like there's something, like society is so built on individualism, which is really a masculine way of viewing the world. It's like, G.K. Chesterton said this, is like men need to be specialists because they need to compete, and they only can be useful if they're the best at what they do, right? They have to be better than most men at whatever they choose to do. So that's why the question, what do you do, is a man-to-man question. It's like, do you do anything useful? Are you good at that thing? Yeah. Whereas like what women bring to humanity is not necessarily, at least this is what Chesterton said, maybe you agree or disagree. It was not about like being the best specialist at a very specific thing and bad at everything. Like being a good mother means you need to be pretty good at like 20 different things. like, or
All at
many,
the same time.
all at the same time, right? Like you don't need to be the best chef in the whole world, but you need to be a pretty good cook and a pretty good empathizer, pretty good therapist, a pretty good, all of these things, right? And that's what women seem. I mean, most women that we know that we would, like, anyone would, just call feminine is more like that, right? They're creative, they're good at a bunch of things, but are they, necessarily making a ton of money from a specific thing? No. And we know a ton of people here in the Valley like that, like the really creative people who, like, man, if they were with a man who could take care of them, they could trust, they could probably really let their gifts flourish. But now they're trying to make money doing some sorts of arts and crafts thing that's like really not working. And this idea that they need to make X amount of dollars by themselves before they enter a family, that's just like a losing ideology for them.
Yeah. And some of these women also believe, I mean, I've worked so much in this realm of like what is sabotaging us from being in the relationship that we desire, that I see so much like literally how we sabotage, because the feminist idea is also like, oh, I need to accomplish X, Y, and Z before having babies. And then I see so many of my friends struggle at the end of their, or mid 30s, end of the 30s, after having been in a long, good relationship, to then conceive. And there's this idea of like, oh, I need to cross out this, or I need my business to be there before entering all of this, no? And I see them as sabotage. And I mean, I know you're pointing out something entirely different. Like there's just a lot of people that are not meant to be entrepreneurs, and yet the whole world is kind of forcing us to need to accomplish, I don't know what, on Instagram to somehow be worthy of, I don't know what. And it's really fascinating, no? How these masculine currents are basically everywhere, because that's what social media also portrays. That, competition that is obvious and sometimes invisible. And it's,
Yeah, because there's no way to portray, let's say, being like the matriarch of a family where your grandkids love you and your children love you. You've had such a profound impact on like 2 generations, maybe 15 people. You can't really portray that on social media the way you can that a bunch of like 1,000 strangers liked your post, right? And like those are two like almost opposite things. Like the women who are, because there's like this rise of women who like, their thing online is that they're a housewife or trad wife, or they own a farm, they're homesteading, they're being a mom, but they're still, I mean, the irony, and I appreciate that kind of content because it's like a pushback against the other extreme of like everyone, of like the consumerist extreme of everyone being an individual. But there is like an irony of that. And you see the comments sometimes like, oh, if you were really the traditional wife, you wouldn't be bothering, trying to sell courses on how to make sourdough bread, like you would just be doing that, right? But the pressure is, if you're like an amazing mother and grandmother or whatever, no one gets to see it, so you don't get validated by society.
One gets to see it.
And it used to be that society was just the 150 person tribe, and everyone would see it, and everyone would worship the grandmother because they would all, that was the entire world, the 150 people. But now our world is everybody, and these personal, intimate things that are more natural to femininity are not valued.
Yeah. And like in the far past, I think woman itself, like the life giver, was, like we were devoted to that, no? Like just the recognition.
Everyone knew where they came from.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. Wait, I lost my thought. There was something I wanted to say. Yes. I disagree with those comments of like, oh, if you were really a traditional woman, because like we are living in a modern world. And right now, because last week I had a terrible week. Like I really crashed out of fatigue and just holding so much and sleeping so little. And obviously our whole family got sick before that. And we had your parents visiting. Like somehow it all kind of, it was too much, no? So I kind of, I needed space. I went to the sauna to kind of come back to myself. And I do realize like, putting my brain to action in a different form than everything that I do for our family is actually helping me remain sane.
Well, I could relate to that.
So
We've talked about that.
Yeah. So in like a very slow way, I am writing my book right now. Like I see that just a couple of months after birth, like my brain is still like, what? So sometimes I struggle with the 4 hours that I have to focus on writing. But I'm dedicated. And I think by the end of the year, something really beautiful is going to be there. And just having those hours once a week, it's very refreshing, I have to say. And it nourishes me in a very different creative form, no?
Mm-hmm.
And I have also considered maybe taking on one client for that same purpose of like, okay, the support is available. And if it somehow nurtures me, then that's what I want to do. And I think that is perhaps the distinction, no, between forcefully wanting to do something as a mother who's already overloaded with everything because of that attachment or needing to prove something versus doing something when the space is actually there and when it's nourishing. And I think I have made that mistake in the past because the first year with our first was just so difficult that there came a point where I felt like, okay, I want to teach my course again. But the way that the organization before the actual teaching went, I saw that it cost me more than what it gave me. And I learned really well from that experience. And I think it's the reason perhaps why I'm writing the book instead. I mean, it's basically the course that I used to teach because it gives the world access, no? Because I mean, there's so many people, especially in our generation and the generation following, who struggle finding their partner. And yeah.
Right.
So I feel
I
like
want to talk about your book in a second, but actually I have a question with what you just said. It's like, because last year or 2 years ago when you taught your course, I remember we had a few fights around it.
yeah.
I'll just speak from my experience and fill in yours. It's like it felt like you went so deep into your masculine that I was almost left alone at times, and it was difficult. Although with this now, I can see, I totally confirm what you're sharing. Like I can see that in you, that you do seem kind of recharged. Or maybe as the way I would put it is like your empathy gets to like rebuild. That's how I would put it for myself when I spend too much family time. It's like I just need a time to let my empathy, or like I don't want to be emotionally available for a while. I don't know if that's how you feel when you're writing your book.
Yeah.
So what do you think is the difference? Because I can say as your husband, they do seem very different experiences.
I think like the first thing that comes to me is when I started focusing on recording the material and writing the material and all the organization that was needed and the marketing and so on. I didn't know how to do any of that differently than how I used to operate before you and I got together.
Which is like a masculine
Fully
way
masculine.
of product launching,
yeah,
let's say.
I was successful in my entrepreneurship. I knew how to get shit done. I feel I'm very good at what I do. And so the way that I attached myself to that work was exactly with that same ego, I guess. And to switch between basically my masculine and my feminine was very difficult because it was almost like I took on the persona who I was before, and to step back into the woman I've become or am becoming. No, it's like that was just very difficult. And I think the reason I wanted to do it was perhaps a little bit as a form of escape.
Before.
Yeah, before. Whereas now, like I said, no, whatever the pace is, I'm going to be surrendered, because the fact that my brain isn't fully clear it's just what it is, right? So if it takes me a couple of weeks, because I get the Monday afternoon, if it takes me a couple of weeks to like get chapter 2 done, then that's what I do, because I have trust that there is going to be a moment where our baby's going to sleep better. There is going to be a moment where my brain is going to be clearer, and perhaps then I can move quicker. So it's never a linear process, no? And yeah, I don't know. I think I am just, first of all, changed by our second birth, and also just more integrated in the value of who I am as a woman, the way that I provide for our family and for you and for me, and just the recognition of like what I am capable of, like the stretching that it requires for a woman, because I see it as some, I don't know, primal imprint, no? Like the woman feels exactly what's happening in her children's lives, and her husband's life, and what is necessary for the family at large. And only after does she get to feel herself. Like it's like the clarity or the priority is you guys. And the fact that, my great grandmother had more than 10 children, and that used to be quite normal, has me thinking like, wow, the expansiveness of the woman's capacity to feel and to accommodate the needs of others within her family. It's very impressive. And I think that through my experience, I've come to value myself and gain a more natural confidence of who I am. That was very different than before, which therefore, when I dedicate myself to a project like writing my book, it no longer comes from this need to prove anything.
So if I were to translate into man speak, before, what was stressful for everyone because you went back to work for like 2 months was the fact that it was coming from this need to accomplish something, to prove value to yourself.
To myself.
Yeah. And now you have the value intrinsically. So it's like, I'll write the book as it feels right, as it comes.
Because I really want to write it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess, I if, correct me if this is wrong, but like you're not really financially motivated because you don't have to worry about money right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I have a wonderful husband.
Yeah. But also, even for, I can even relate to a lot of it. It's like, obviously when you're stressed about money and you need a certain project to work, it's hard to be creative and really, it's a challenge to be more authentic and let the feelings guide.
Yeah.
Or if you're trying to fit in a certain schedule. I was just telling you, I'm about to re-record an episode I just did twice because I was so focused on getting it done on a certain day that I kind of missed the point. It's right. Like that.
Yeah.
That's kind of like the same thing,
Yeah.
like a mini
The
version of it.
stress. Yeah. And in some way, even though perhaps it wasn't related to finances, it was connected to time. Like the date had already been set, and then we made all those travels in between, and it kind of messed up what I thought how things were going to go, and that built on stress as well. So to have a date when it starts and a date when it ends, you kind of have to show up and have everything ready, which I didn't actually. Like in the midst of teaching, I still had to finish the final modules. So my plan didn't work. And I think I've come to realize, that those are also very masculine aspects, no, the time and space aspect. Because, whenever the magic of pregnancy is exactly that, the letting go of time and space. You
don't know when the baby's coming.
Yeah, the not needing to attach, to needing to wake up at a certain hour, be present at a certain hour, accomplish certain tasks. And when I think about women who have no option of needing to continue working when pregnant, it breaks my heart. But it breaks my heart even more to think of women who choose to continue doing all these things in the time and space frame, in the masculine form, when they have the option to fully surrender to the magic that happens in pregnancy. And it's so delicate. It's so mystical. It's so like, beyond time and space. Like, it's so hard to describe in words, but we're bypassing all of that. And we're therefore, blocking the woman from encountering like the real power that is inside. And it's really fascinating how in a way, all of that, or like the way that the world is evolving has pushed the powerful voice of the woman to the background, and the only voice of the woman that is considered powerful is when she speaks from her masculine. I did want to say one more thing. Now I think I remember the thought that I lost previously, because you said something about, the grandmother teaching the younger generation, like her grandchildren, and, the mother preparing her daughter for whatever is to come. And that seems very beautiful and idealistic and so on. But in that first year with our daughter, when I went through my ego death and identity death, and I really felt like I lost my mind multiple times, I had this urge, of like, I need an elder, like I need an older woman who's gone through all of this, who is far beyond on the other side. And I couldn't find her because I felt like the struggles that I specifically went through were in a way incomprehensible. How you say this? Incomprehensible. By my grandmother and mother, right? Because they are from a different tradition. They come from a different background. And the way that I have led my life, being a world traveler, becoming an entrepreneur, blah, blah, blah. And therefore the difficulty that I was facing within my identity, like you said, like if women become mothers before they have formed their career, then the smack in their face is just going to be less. It was like all of these components added to the complexity of how I was losing my mind and the kind of guidance that I was seeking. and therefore also the very specific type of elder that I was looking for and couldn't find. Like, I ended up having this session with some woman who helps women integrate birth stories, and in some ways it was helpful. You know, she was older, her kids were already teenagers. Like, of course she has a lot more knowledge than I do, but it still felt like well, I can't call her outdated, but somehow it was outdated, for lack of better words.
Not applicable to you, not relevant to you.
Not relevant. Yeah.
Although your story is probably going to become more common in this next generation.
Yeah. And I do feel like this is probably why women now are kind of waking up like, oh, the nuclear family doesn't make sense. Continuing to work doesn't make sense. Wanting to live in community, you know, all of these things, being surrounded by like-minded people, raising their kids in alternative ways, blah, blah, blah. To have that support, and also to become the wisdom keepers or the elders that our grandchildren are going to need, or our children, you know?
Yeah, but it's hard to imagine, like, in the way that our lives are so different than your grandmother's life, our grandkids' life, if things progress the way they are, is going to be so different. They're going to be like, what, nuclear family? Like, what are you even talking about?
Right. I hope so.
I mean, well, who knows? I mean, you don't know. Well, the thing is, we're going in a direction where the nuclear family might be a much more natural thing than, you know, all these separate economic entities. Two questions from what you just said. One, do you think, well, maybe you even covered this already, but like your great grandmother, I assume with their 10 children, she probably had her first kid pretty young.
Likely. Yeah.
So she didn't really have, I mean, that was her career. Like, when she became an adult, presumably the first adult responsibility she had was taking care of.
Yeah, of course. And by the time she had her 10th child, her first child was already 20 and probably having her own kids. So like the support of the children themselves, the support with the other children, it's a bit of a different dynamic, right?
But also, you know, by the time she was 30, she probably had 5 kids, and like she was like a pro.
Right.
It's like that was like she had a PhD in motherhood by then, as opposed to a woman having a career and then having her first kid at 35 or something. Yeah. You know? And then the other thing was like, you know, so again, this is not like to criticize people who've taken different paths or anything like that, but we have a lot of acquaintances, women who like kind of portray like, oh, feminine entrepreneurship, right? Like, oh, I'm an entrepreneur, but I do it in a feeling-based way. And like, you know, and again, not intending to be judgmental, but it does seem like a thing of like, either they do that and they don't make money, and you know, they end up just switching jobs or doing something or whatever, or they say they're feminine and they wear the flowing robes and whatever and take bikini pictures, but they're actually operating very much from a masculine framework, you know, and you don't, but what you're describing, you know, the way you're rewriting your book, it actually seems like it only makes sense when you're contained. Like, someone has to be the masculine or something has to be the masculine, right? Otherwise there are time and space and money needs.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually in a little bit of a clash right now with a really dear friend of mine. And sometimes I lay in bed kind of, you know, it hits me because we haven't worked it out completely yet. I mean, it's nothing serious, but I did realize in my contemplation, like, oh, actually the thing that I'm clashing with her is the lack of her being in her feminine and me not wanting to compete. It's like, it's just not natural to me. Oh, yeah. And competition, of course, happens in very like subtle ways, even between sisters, even between mothers. You know, like you say, like there's this aura of like, oh, we're there for each other. But beneath it all is like, oh, you feed your child that? Oh, I wouldn't do that before the age of 1. Or like, you know, whereas I feel like the true feminine would come in a more abundant, sharing way that is nourishing and that is accepting of the differences, because I feel like that is the feminine, to like tune in with the voice and know what is right
and create harmony
and create harmony and really be there to like uplift and support. But anyway, I'm drifting off a little bit. What you said about entrepreneurship, yeah, I see that. And I was probably exactly there, no, thinking that I was very feminine when I really wasn't.
I want to ask you about because like something that's kind of mysterious to men is like female competition, because it's different than male competition. But I'm nasty. Curious. Yeah, well, I'm curious, like, is it a natural thing? Is it because, like, again, women in like the perfect utopian Paleolithic tribe, would they still have these kind of catty moments? Because I'm thinking like, you know, the times I'm remembering in one case, which was one of these things, like it's overtly feminine. Women were super empowered from a kind of a feminist way. Like they were empowered to basically act like men when it came to sexuality and like, you know, with all of that stuff. And I remember one of my mentors said like, oh, women in this world act like men because they're so empowered, they're so free, they're so safe in the cult, right? They act like men and they compete. They compete over who's like the hottest, the way boys compete over who's the fastest or strongest or whatever. And you know, that's something that's kind of stuck with me of like, oh, environments where I don't even know how to put it. Like there's certain kinds of environments that maybe I'm guessing encourage female competition as opposed to my idea of the utopian Paleolithic tribe where like maybe there's no reason to compete with your sisters because you're all one tribe.
Well, I think it's easy to kind of idolize what the past was like, but I think there's always been moments of bitchiness, no, within whatever setting. I just want to get that out of the way first.
Well, no, it's honestly
But
like a good question. Like, because like a male competition, we can see like that's definitely a natural thing. Like, there's no
yeah,
natural environment where boys wouldn't compete. I'm wondering, is that
but
the case?
I mean,
For
come on,
girls too?
if girls are in their adolescence, you're in a tribe, the next door tribe is also small, then there might only be a few boys that, you know, of course, there would be competition in that sense of like wanting to be more beautiful or, yeah, whatever. Whereas in the modern sisterhood, I find that it's all kind of sneaky. Like recently, I was in a gathering and it didn't feel authentic, and it's like, yeah, it's like when I'm met by that energy of like pretending we're all best friends, but somehow through like to read in between the lines to catch on this energy of like, look at me, I'm better. Yeah, I don't know. It always has me drift a little bit to the background because I feel like it's all just rooted in insecurity, and I'm not gonna provoke it or poke it, and I'm definitely not gonna go against it or need to prove something myself, because I think that true confidence, and maybe this is the difference between male and female confidence, true confidence from a woman is in her ability to listen, in her ability to be, in her ability to answer when the curiosity is there, but not to like jump in and need to prove who they are. Or maybe this is my wrong interpretation.
No, I think
but
I think it checks
there's
out. I think I told you. My friend Jamie and I had a blog where we took a poll. Did I tell you about this?
maybe.
Okay. Anyway, so friend Jamie, this was like 15, almost 20 years ago. We were trying to make like a dating advice blog for women, and we had like, I don't know, 4 subscribers or something. It doesn't matter. But we did some kind of cool things. We did a poll where we asked all of these men and women that we knew, like people in their early 20s. There's a 2-question poll. Do you think you're attractive, and how do you know? Everyone says they thought they were attractive, regardless of whether we thought they were attractive or not, right? And that just makes sense, right? You want to hopefully you have a positive view of yourself. But then with the how do you know, all the men, all the boys, men, 22-year-old
Young
boys,
men,
young
yes.
men, they always had an external, like objective thing of like, oh yeah, when I ask out women more than 50% of the time, they say yes. So that means I'm attractive, or like, you know, whatever. It's like something external. And the women, all of it was internal. It's like, well, I just feel attractive. And you know, and I was obviously coming from a masculine paradigm of like, yeah, but like everyone thinks they're attractive. Like how do you know? Like, is there any evidence? It's like, no, I don't need evidence. It's like, I feel I'm attractive. Every single woman said this, whether they're beautiful or not so conventionally attractive. And it was just interesting. It's like the male brain is primed for objectivity, which is also how our society is built,
Yeah.
right? I think society would say like, oh, a psychologist would say like, oh, these women are following some sort of bias where they all think they're beautiful and they're not. And the men are a little bit closer, but they're actually just 2 different ways of interpreting reality. And everyone thought they were attractive, you know?
Fascinating.
Yeah. And it makes sense, right? Because also like if you are a man, oh, there's 2 ways to interpret. The way I used to interpret it is like, if you're a man, you have a little bit more control over what happens to your life, at least in like conventional society, right? Like if you compete and you win, you get more stuff. If you compete and you lose, you get less stuff. With women, it's kind of like, it's a little bit less in your control, it seems. At
It's
least,
abstract.
yeah. Well,
You just
also it's
can't
like,
always measure it.
like women aren't going out typically, or most women don't have the urge to like approach a bunch of men and see if anyone will date them. It's like they kind of just,
Attract.
they just attract, right? Like they just are who they are. Maybe they try to make themselves beautiful like for themselves, but then that's also what happens to attract a man. I forgot what my other interpretation was. Oh, well, it was what you just said of just like, it is more the feminine thing to just be,
Right.
right?
So
Like, you don't have to go out and accomplish things to like prove your self-worth.
yeah, but it's interesting because whenever I find myself in one of these conversations where, the woman is trying to remain nice, trying to like be on the sisterhood level, whatever, but between the lines, between the lines, I can feel this passive aggressiveness in a very subtle way. A part of me wishes that we could just freaking communicate like men, because men would never find themselves in this weird back and forth
Ambiguous.
forever about things that are so irrelevant to the thing that I want to talk about. It's like, can we just be direct and straightforward? So it's really interesting because what is happening is like this clash between the masculine, but yet the impossibility to resolve it through the masculine way of communicating,
I guess, yeah. I think I sent you this meme, or did you send me the meme of like, feminists are always angry because they don't have a man to tell them to calm them down, or to tell them to calm down. And it's like, it's a joke, and it's like a little misogynistic and all of that stuff, right? I don't like, but there's also kind of truth to that, right? Like
the simplicity of a man, yeah.
Yeah. It's
of
like,
how you think, how you operate. It's like so straightforward.
or like, if two literal sisters were having this kind of ambiguous, catty, thing, but there was a man they trusted, like maybe their literal brother, literal older brother or father. So like, could you sort this out? Like, it'd be pretty simple for a guy.
You would bring it back to the point.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you have this discussion with some of your male friends.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a very great thing.
Well, I have some guy friends who are very much in their feminine, and it's like, man, can't you just shoot straight? I kind of, a little bit yelled at one. It's like, you're not my wife. Like, I don't want to sort through your sub-communications, right? Just like, you're a dude, just like tell it to me straight, right?
But it's interesting because those are the men that are so easy to be friends with as a woman.
Yeah.
I do like these men.
Yeah. I mean, because they think, they communicate like women and all of that stuff, right? So it's just, but it's like, it's very frustrating because like, I will put up with it with you because you're my wife. But do I want to sort through someone's like emotional subtext? Like it's a lot of fucking work, right?
Yeah, and sometimes I do feel like you're not responding as a woman, and it's frustrating. And then and then I see like, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, we talked about this recently, like a man. I mean, you can say that part, but like, a woman needs to sometimes just be with women. Like last Sunday, I was with a couple of my girlfriends with our kids, and it's like my kids operate better when there's more women around. It's like they're all perfectly behaved. They kind of rotate between us, so not all the load is on me.
They're getting so much love and attention. It's like they can go. It's like I do remember this of being like an 8-year-old or 7-year-old boy. If like it was just a lot of like aunties around, it's like I'm gonna get like big hugs and like warm breasts around me, like lots of like I'm just gonna get all of this like love and adoration, and I don't have to do anything, right? Whereas like when a man's around, you kind of have to, actually. I think I told you this is also my friend Jamie. Her friend who was a single mom was visiting with her 2-year-old boy, and I just happened to I was just passing through. I hung out with her and her roommate a bunch back then. But the boy didn't see me, and he thought it was he was in a room of women, and he was like dancing and being free and like flowing, and like other women were walking in, like she had some friend, like he was just free. And then I was sitting behind him, he didn't see me. He turns around and sees there's a man there, and suddenly he sat down straight. He's like, oh, there's a man who like there's now consequences to my action. Where I could see in him with all these women, he didn't even know most of the women in the room. Like he just felt totally free to be himself. And obviously there's pros and cons to everything, but like this is like kind of what a father brings to a family or to a room.
Yeah,
like
and it might actually also be different for a little boy versus a little girl, because like I mean the research that I did in the past when I was attracting a lots of male clients specifically with the absence of a father figure and how that sort of influenced their psychology and their upbringing and their connection to their masculinity and stability and all of these things. I found it so fascinating that I was like suddenly surrounded by these clients that all were dealing with the same problem, that I kind of dove into that. And it seems that when parents break up, obviously the mother usually remains the primary caregiver. That affects a little boy way more than a little girl, because a little girl is more open to accept, a stepfather as her male role model. Whereas for a boy, it's like the absence of his biological father is just going to have long-term consequences. So I wonder if this boy had a stronger effect on you. Because when I think of Keilani, like when I'm alone with her,
Wait, effect on me or I had effect on him?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, the little boy.
Oh, yeah,
And your presence. Because when I think of Keilani and I go to friends, when I was pregnant, for example, or she was our only child still, whenever there were other men, she'd be extra cute still. Like it's like, yeah, it didn't have such an effect on her.
Well, she did when she was really young. I mean, she's always been very social, but she did behave differently with men, right? She was a little bit distrustful.
Oh, yeah?
I mean, I'm kind of remembering.
I don't remember.
Like where a woman, she would just dive into any woman's arms, right?
But in Thailand, maybe it was different because the men were quite
feminine.
Yeah, and the whole culture, like all the people would speak to her. Like they whenever we walked into a restaurant, they would greet her first before they greeted us. And yeah, so I don't know. Yeah, I guess maybe there has been some suspicion.
But I do. I mean, I do think it because like there's more tension when there's a man around, and this is even true for adult men. Like there's more tension if there's a man that you don't know, and then I can I mean, my dad was very around and involved, but not really connected to his masculinity. And I feel like, especially around puberty, there was like, it was like, man, I wish there was a strong male role model to tell me what to do. Like, that's kind of what I remember craving this. And I can imagine if you grew up without any father figure, that is just like this vacuum of like, someone give me a little, maybe discipline's the wrong word, but somebody give me some like kind of narrow the path for me, because it's so intimidating to just be anything. Yeah. Boundaries essentially.
Yeah. Cause like, okay, now I'm getting some memories where this is very clear. Like even last night, like I was the whole day, doing everything. I mean, I had support in the house, but it was also a woman. And then when you came, it was like, oh, I could relax. And that is like a small version of what I experienced the few times that you went on a solo journey. Mm-hmm. You'd be gone for like 1 week. The maximum you did was 2 weeks, and it was terrible. It was so exhausting because I had to step in as the male and the female role. There were even times that for some irrational reason I would feel not safe, like in the night. And it's just because when you're around, all of that is taken care of. I don't even have to think about it. And when you're not, it's like, oh, I have to step in even more. And I guess you experienced the same in the opposite way, right? Because last week when I had such a terrible week and I went to the sauna, you gave me most of the day on Friday to like just recover. And you were dead by the end of the day.
Yeah.
And I have to be honest, like a part of me was happy you got to experience that because you were only with Raiden, our smallest. And for me, I have days like that, but then it continues in the night where I'm woken up. I mean, last night it was 4 or 5 times, no? So like every two hours in the beginning, and then it's every hour at the end of the night. And that just continues, right? Like I had maybe 1 week with somewhat good sleep since he was born 3.5 months ago. So like a part of me was like, you get to feel some of that exhaustion. No, but of course you're a man. So the way that you absorb that kind of needing to hold is very different than the way that I'm kind of flowing through that. And the same in my experience of like your absence and the way I have to then, speak up and set boundaries. And not that I don't set boundaries, but it's just different. Yeah. Like when I navigate difficult situations with Keilani, I always come from like an emotional aspect, right? I meet her there and then we move through whatever needs to be moved through. And there are moments where I'm so tired and I'll just always call you and be like, oh, please tell her to do this. And you just say it and she does it.
Yeah, because like,
it's just refreshing.
It's not that my love is conditional or a man's love. It's like, but my approval is, it's like, that's, I think, a difference.
And you step out of your emotional body.
Yeah.
In these moments. And I guess I can do that, but it costs more energy. I don't know how to put it.
I mean, if anything, because there have been times I've been too harsh in disciplining her. And it's like, you've been reminding me essentially to still be emotionally available and still connect to that. And like, I try to remind myself like, okay, try to see the world through our 2-year-old's eyes. I don't have to be so
rough,
harsh,
yeah.
But it is a little easier for me to drop my empathy. It's like, it's just a little bit easier. Like, all right, she's being a brat right now. I'm going to tell her that basically. I mean, in some way. Because even like that day, I was wrecked that day that I spent the whole day with the baby. like it was fun. It was enjoyable. It was nice father
He
son
was
bonding
difficult
time.
that week also, I guess.
Yeah, but it's
Yeah.
like, you know, when I think about the type of exhaustion, if I was like lifting rocks all day or doing yard work all day, I would have been less exhausted. Because like
Yeah.
I mean, and maybe this is something that can be trained, and you know, I'm not saying that all this, you know, this is inherent just because, you know,
I think it's inherent though.
yeah, I mean, it feels that way. It's like I am so not equipped to be emotionally available for an infant
Constantly.
for 8 hours straight. Like it's not like I can deal with lifting heavy rocks for 8 hours or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Like and like that would actually feel good. Whereas like at the end of the day, it's like I had to escape my body. Like I wanted to like just I wanted to play video games all night just to like do something totally not
Yeah, I was going to bring
emotional.
that up,
Yeah.
like to play chess, because the couple that's going to visit us today, like her husband does exactly the same, and we
Yeah.
were laughing about it last week.
Yeah.
And to me, it's like after a long day, to like open a book that is, how do you say this in English? Like a knowledge book instead of a novel.
Nonfiction, prescriptive
Nonfiction.
book, yeah.
It's like that would wear me out so much, where it's
Yeah.
what you do,
Yeah,
or like the
'cause-
calculation that is necessary to play chess or whatever these other games are. It's like the thought of it alone, it just depletes me.
Yeah,
It's
'cause
like,
I mean, it
what,
really-
to use my brain after all this? Whereas for you, it's kind of like relaxing the brain.
Yeah, well, it's like doing what feels good, right? You know, or it's like it's
Yeah.
the opposite. It's like because actually, all of the you know new friends I've made lately who actually play chess, they're all fathers, and I haven't asked them. I'm actually going to ask him later when he comes over, like because I've always been kind of interested in chess, but I only became addicted to chess once we got pregnant, and like I had to be emotionally available all the time in a
More.
way that I was never used to. Like no relationship in the past had to be that emotionally available for anyone.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, shit. Like the only thing that feels like a recharge is something purely cold, calculating, left brain. And then I feel like, okay, I'm relaxing now.
Yeah, or to smoke a
Playing chess.
joint and enter
Yeah.
your feminine in a more relaxed way. It's like, yeah.
Yeah, because you know, I mean, it's like you know, Joe Rogan has a bit on this, but like when I've also smoked more weed than I did in the previous 2 years. I mean, the last 2 years I've smoked more cannabis than the previous 2 years by a lot. I don't think I barely smoked at all until we became
Yeah, me too.
until we had a kid, and it's just like, yeah, I mean, I don't like using it as a crutch. I do sometimes, but like I'm not trying to think when I smoke. I'm not trying to think very hard, or I'm not trying to
brings more
accomplish anything.
presence and patience.
And I can really understand, like when Kenani's having a tantrum, I'm like, oh yeah, if I'm a little stoned, if I took a toke, it's like, I kind of get, yeah, I understand. Like it sucks
Yeah.
you can't eat ice cream for dinner. Like, all right, I don't get upset about it. I'm like, yeah, I get it. You know, yeah, all right, yeah, you know. Whereas, the opposite is like if I drink coffee and she needs something and it's like irrational, my patience is so thin. It's like
Yeah.
I want to accomplish stuff, you know.
But you know what's funny? Because like the opposite of what I experience as a woman after a long day of caring for all these emotions is to distract my emotions with other emotions. So I'll read a novel. I don't watch so much TV, but when I do, it has to be emotionally impactful. So it's like I'm replacing my story with another story so that I can just take a rest from my feelings, not from feeling. And I love, whatever I watch on TV, if it makes me cry, I love that. It's like...
Cry about someone else's life.
Yeah, because it like, I don't know, I think it's just a way of releasing whatever is happening in my life that I can't always give the attention to.
Yeah. Whereas I either want to play chess or I want to play some video game where I'm conquering and killing and you know, something like
Here
that.
we are.
Yeah. Well, did want to cover some of what's in your book. Actually, I didn't mean to read any of your book, but last time I dropped off the baby, or one of the times while you were writing, I did catch the line of like something about money and power.
Yeah.
I think it was
Power dynamics.
Yeah, I think you were talking about maybe what we started this episode on. It's like
Yeah, I
there's
thought that was
something-
peculiar. Because
Well,
it was...
I did think about it independently, but I did kind of catch that line. I guess you were writing a chapter about
Patterns, yeah. Yeah, that chapter is about past lovers and releasing patterns. And it's more, it's not so much about these men and their inadequacy and blah, blah, blah. But
it was
it's more
kinda like
about taking the responsibility of like, who is this version of you that clearly created these patterns?
Well, with the money
have
thing,
an
it was specifically
understanding.
like you kept money, or you made sure you prioritized money to keep yourself from vulnerability.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah. Can you specify your question?
No, I was just bringing it up. I was just saying, we already talked about it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, in the book, I bring out this pattern specifically because money is such a clear way to like emphasize that pattern, right? Of like the power dynamics and the imbalance and how emasculating it can be. That story is like a symbol because not everyone's going to be in that position. No, not every woman is going to be, needing to spend more than the man that she's with, whether she wants to or not. But it's the subtlety in which that occurs that through feminism being part of how we grow as women, I think there's an obliviousness. At least that was part of me, like oblivious to the fact that just because of my gender, the fact that I would spend this or save a particular situation, it would then ruin the balance between me and my man. Like I was oblivious to it. That's why I had to have this pattern occur in various relationships to kind of see it for what it was, because I just didn't want to confess, I guess, that it would have to have an impact just because I'm a woman. But I think everyone knows, had that been a reversed situation where, for example, I missed my flight and my man had to pay for it, no way would that linger as something negative.
Yeah.
It would probably just remain as a seed of positivity of like, oh, he was there for me. Like, oh, he could really save the situation.
And men feel, I mean, if the man actually likes the woman, he feels good that he
Eso.
could, that it's like, you know, it's like kind of the thing, you know, this is extreme, but like the whole world of men just like sending, like, you know, see these Instagram models or women with OnlyFans will just have their Cash App thing. And like these men who maybe are lonely or whatever, and they have money, they just feel good sending money to a woman they only see in a screen. Like there's something like, it's like a sick, twisted version of it, but it's like something, or even like the sugar daddy thing is like, there's something that just makes a man feel like a man, that he can provide for a woman who appreciates it. Whereas the opposite, it you know, we know so many relationships where a Western woman dates a man from a country where their currency, you know, just because their currency isn't strong, it creates this imbalance, and it kind of always ends up ruining things. That just seems to be like your story.
Yeah, because it's like these men would just lose their authenticity, and I could see like they just wanted to prove something. They wanted to make up for it. They wanted to be seen in a certain way, and that drive kind of drove me away because I could no longer see the man that I thought was inside, and I didn't think money was that important, but it's such a power symbol. And I had to go through those lessons. But all of this occurs in so many more subtle ways in relationships where women are oblivious to how their actions are contributing to emasculating the man that they're with. And then they complain after the fact that the man didn't take the initiative when there's no room for taking initiative.
Yeah.
And it's these kind of like subtle things that I really focus on in my book, because I kind of write it for the strong, independent woman, because I do feel, there's a part of where the man obviously needs to take responsibility, but I'm a woman, so I write for women. And I see in such clarity, like, feminist imprints, whether women recognize themselves as being feminist or not, are ruining the potential of great relationships.
Yeah.
Like, I'm convinced of it. And this inability to surrender, I would say dive into that insecurity rather than needing to up your game and not let go of your work while getting pregnant, things like that, no? And, one thing that did come up while we were talking is that, when I was teaching my course, I don't know when it was, a year and a half ago or 2 years, in that when I compare where we were as a couple to where we are now, I feel like in my pregnancy with Raiden, we did need to move through some turbulence, some memories that, were bubbling up to the surface that I had to integrate to prepare myself for birth. And what I recognized in that moment was like, I do have to open up more to trusting you more. And it wasn't that I distrusted you, but I could see like, in a long-term relationship, you can't stagnate in like, oh, this is the level of love, I love you, or this is the level I trust you. I feel like that's the art of being in a long-term relationship. Like, you have to recognize where the stagnation of these aspects of connection are outdated, and where you have to confront the other through certain truths or certain residue of experiences from the past or whatever, and move through that. No, because it wasn't easy to like have that conversation, but I felt the necessity because you are my main anchor in birth, and to know that I can rely on you being my voice if I can't speak, or, you know, agreeing with whatever guidance I feel inside, like that is essential. Yeah, to have a birth, I would say, the way that we
Yeah.
birthed.
But in that also, like a
I
lot
mean,
of
it's just
that
a symbol.
discussion was me trusting you with the stuff that I couldn't see. Like me
Right.
trusting you with like the requests you make, which honestly in our first birth I didn't, because we hadn't experienced birth, and I was like, I don't know, the
Yeah.
midwife says this, so we should probably listen
Yeah,
to
we had
her,
to we had
you
to
know.
learn.
But like it's like kind of like trusting or even valuing the female domain of like, okay, you're going inward. I can't see what you're seeing or see or feel what you're feeling, but I'm trusting that you're going and you're finding what's right, and then I'm executing it, especially in something that's like a woman's world, which
Yeah,
is
that's where she
birth,
takes the lead.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, yeah, the upgrade of trusting the man, I think, is an ongoing thing. And I think I specifically want to touch upon this because there are so many people who think they need to do all this inner work to be ready to be with their partner. Whereas I see like, that's all bullshit, really, because the work really happens when you meet your person and when you continue to go deeper
Yeah.
together.
Well, there's also, you know, a lot of relationship trouble comes from the fact when someone has a wound, they select someone that matches the wound rather than someone who's like good for them. So I think that, you know, I mean, inner work, you do need to do that before you select your
Sure,
partner,
but that
kind of.
wound is never fully going to heal. Like, I feel like it's the relationship itself and the opening up to trust that hasn't been experienced before that actually heals that wound. You see what I'm getting at?
Yeah, actually, this is interesting because, like, you know, a lot of married guys who basically, you know, there's different kinds of issues in there, but like they basically have been reaching out to me because there's a polarity issue, right? Whether it's showing up in their sex life or in their communication or whatever. And I can see how it's a big challenge that if you've been with someone for 7 years and you've had this very depolarized, maybe feminist paradigm relationship, that's actually much harder than a single guy being like, oh, I'm going to change how I behave so I attract a woman who fits me, you know? Like, you know,
Claro.
it's like you have to overcome not only your own patterns, but the other person's patterns together. Hopefully
Yeah.
they're willing.
Yeah. I agree. You know, like that is basically what my book is based on, to get you in that place to attract something completely different than what happened in the past. No, like to break those patterns, to be in a space of trust so that, yeah, a trustworthy person can walk in. But yeah, there's something about deepening, like, I guess, polishing those edges of the deeply embedded distrust, I guess, in the
Yeah.
masculine that is, whether it's obviously present or invisibly present,
Well,
like
I mean,
it's present.
to counterpoint what I just said, like even though it is definitely harder after a relationship has been together with like a different
Claro.
dynamic, but I think, you know, what I always tell men, and I guess you tell a similar thing to women, is like there's a lot of what you change in yourself can affect your partner, right? It's like when a woman really trusts her man, the man usually like rises up and fills in the gap. You know, if he's a half decent guy, you know, it's like, and the same thing, like, you know, it works both ways. Like a man stepping into his masculine, even if his partner is against it in theory, she'll probably sink into her feminine because it'll just feel better, right? That's kind of, you know, that's kind of like the brainwashing, if you will, or you know, the covert relationship dynamic change.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess that's the part where the man has to step up. Because I feel like you were very good at that, like in the beginning of our relationship, to have those boundaries, I guess. Yeah, I don't know how to specify, but like the last thing an intelligent woman wants is someone who agrees with her all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Disagreeableness. I did want to say something earlier. I mean, maybe last idea about money is, you know, every woman, no matter how much money she makes or wants to make, wants to be with a guy who makes more. Like no woman wants to have to be in the space where she pays for things. And like, you
I
know,
think it's
you and I
exhausting.
both know a lot of women who are very successful financially. And maybe they even are beautiful and they have all these other great attributes, but they can't find someone to date because they make a lot of money, let's say, and they don't want to be in a position where they're taken care of or something. And like, yeah, it's like, you know, this is like a prime example of there are certain things about our biology or our ancestry or our makeup that you can't really override with ideologies or even economic factors, you know?
Yeah, it's imprinted in like the primal aspect. It just makes
Yeah.
sense.
Not to say that, you know, it's not something that can't be overcome, but is very difficult.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
if we were to meet a couple and the woman is like the one, you know, the driving force with the super successful business, and her man perhaps has a good working business as well, but not quite like hers, I would probably respect him less.
Well, I don't know if he's hard because, you know, 'cause also like, especially with like I don't know if I agree with that just because, the, like say like a Western woman dating a guy from a developing country, like he might be working really hard, but he gets paid in pesos, you know. I don't think I would respect him less, but I would imagine they probably have some issues
I
based
think
on that.
yeah, their dynamic like that would be clear.
Yeah, and it's
And
unfortunate
it's
because
not
maybe he's
that
like a
I
super
think,
awesome dude,
and
you
it's
know.
not that I would disrespect him, just to clarify, but I think my respect would just be less. And I think it's because that in itself symbolizes that, you know, she's wearing the pants and therefore he is not really operating in his masculine relationship. I think you're the one who told me these statistics of like divorce and how it's often driven
Oh
by
yeah.
this.
Well, actually, yeah. One of the two highest predictors of divorce, from a book I read, is when the woman makes significantly more money than the man, or when the woman has much higher levels of testosterone than average women. Those women get divorced the most, and you would imagine that's because like she's just in the role that is not sexiest. It's not like what turns a woman on to be in charge, right?
Exactly, because like one of the questions that became my lead in when I was dating to see whether I should give this more attention or just walk away was the question: is this the father of my children? And it's a very simple question that usually, in my opinion, would get a very direct answer because women have the tendency, you know, to like kind of see the potential in the man that they're with and see the potential of what he could be or see the potential of how things could unfold or whatever. But then you're kind of aiming for things to be different than what they are in the present moment. Not to say that people don't grow, but I think a lot of women waste a lot of precious time in relationships like that, where actually they know instinctually from a very primal base aspect of self that they can't fully surrender and they aren't fully met by these virtues that I feel are
Yeah. Well, I
masculine.
think this is an example of, you know, we in modern society, we grew up so much later than our biology wants us to, because like that idea of like women seeing potential in a man, that's really useful in a
Right.
situation where you're getting married at when you're a teenager and
You're
you're
still
having children
becoming.
at 17, and like it's like, of course, if you're a 16-year-old girl with an 18-year-old boy, of course you have to see his potential because he hasn't done anything yet, right? It's like hopefully you've been raised in a way like you can assess, okay, this is a hardworking guy, he's confident, at some point he's likely to accomplish something with his life because we're having kids now, not when
Right.
he has his career ready. Whereas when you're in your 30s and a woman is still operating from that, it's kind of like a 15-year-old or 16-year-old girl's life strategy now applied at 35. It doesn't work because if you're with a 40-year-old guy, like he should have achieved some part of his potential. No, I mean, not even about career accomplishment. Like my career really didn't like reach anything until my 30s. That's just the nature of modern life. But like certain emotional characteristics should have been developed by the time you're that age, you know?
Yeah, but I think a woman wouldn't I mean, not directly, or I can't speak for all women, but the way that I was looking at potential wasn't necessarily like, oh, how much does he make? What is his career like? But it was really from this,
The characteristics.
yeah, just like being grounded, being like strong in certain
Yeah.
ways that will
Well,
allow me to just take a step back as opposed to always needing the one to take initiative.
yeah.
And that was part of, yeah, the patterns that I had to move through. And this question just made it so simple because it took away all the bullshit that we can create through the narratives of our mind and the imaginations or whatever, kind of convince ourselves, no, like, oh, but he has this, this, and this. But that question is just laser sharp. It's like, you feel it. And with you, I've had experiences I never had, no, in that sense of like, wow, I can actually relax. And it's almost like through your presence, I became more of me. Because in other relationships, I would always feel at certain points of the relationship, or like I would always need to like retreat, take space, or come back to myself because it was exhausting, I guess, to operate from my masculine. Whereas with you, it's like, oh, I could just like kind of drop certain things away because that's what you take care of. And I feel like, oh, there's more of me now. Like I'm more by being with you.
Oh, thanks. So I know your book isn't coming out for a while, but is there anything you want to tell the people? Oh, by the way, I mean, we're recording this maybe a month before I'll publish it. I think this is episode 200 if I order it.
Way.
Yeah, I think the
I
last
think
time
I was 100.
you were 100, yeah. So I'll see you at 300.
Well, you better do 100 in a year then. No.
I don't know. Yeah, we'll see.
It's possible, huh?
You could be 250 also.
What about 222?
Well, that's like soon. Well, yeah. So anyway, anything you want to share? I mean, I guess your book won't be available when this comes out, probably in September. But
yeah, but people can go to nalayachicana.com and sign up to be updated when it actually comes out. Because who knows? It might go faster. It might go slower.
It's the feminine. You don't know.
Yeah,
it's not on a schedule.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's going to be called "Stop Fucking Around."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not Dare to Love.
Dare to Love is probably going to be the subtitle. Because
I'm gonna argue with you on this offline.
Okay.
Yeah.
You may. Yeah, the course was always called Dare to Love, and I do really like it. And I know
and it's a great title.
Yeah. Okay. I still like Dare to Love, but Stop Fucking Around is just like direct. I think there's just so many.
That sounds like a chapter title.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's based on shamanic practices and tantric practices, and it's the journey of releasing patterns to end up in a space where there is a trust and openness to attract
the person you want to be with.
The person you want to be with. Yeah, because I think there's just a lot of bullshit around when it comes to manifestation, like, make a list or visualize. And it's like, if any of that worked, you probably already be in the relationship you want to be with. And I think in many cases, it's just far more complex. And it's fun. It's fun. I like rituals. I like tantric practices to open the heart. And I've seen, amazing things by doing this work. And actually, I was in the middle of teaching my course when you and I fell in love. Yeah. So it worked for me as well.
Yeah, you assigned me to do some ritual, and then we ended up getting together. So you tricked me with witchcraft, it sounds like.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Cool. Not really. Come on.
I know. All right. See you in a few episodes. Goodbye, everybody.
I love you.
Love you.